Pastor T.D. Jakes has had a very bad week, allegedly partying with P. Diddy. There are two sides to every story, but there's only one backstory. T.D. Jakes sat emotionless in his office for hours, listening intently to the miniature waterfall on his desk. Mrs. White, a member of his congregation, barged in the room. She was an overzealous woman with years of childhood trauma. Her coat flung to the floor, and her session with T.D. Jakes began like it always has, 30 minutes late. "What do you want to talk about today, Mrs. White?" My son." Jakes sat up in his seat, forcing himself to give her his undivided attention. "I saw my son kissing a man." "And how do you feel about that?" "Pastor, I was hoping to be a grandmother." Jakes forced his attention somewhere across the room. "Pastor, are you hearing me? Is this a bad time?" Jakes collapsed his hands into a ball and released an exhausting sigh. "I want my son to go to heaven." Jake's tone was as fragile as a newborn freshly out of the womb. "There is no hell. Hell is self-contrived. It's a way to self-correct or keep ourselves in line." "But the Bible says," "Yeah, I know what the Bible says. The Bible has been rewritten 4,768 times. Its goal is to control a vast part of the population with fear." Mrs. White shook her head and stared into his abhorrent gaze. The image of her spiritual hero quickly dissolved away. She was witnessing a man seemingly struggling to preserve his spiritual walk, the walk that has brought him millions of dollars. She tilted her head. "Pastor, is there something you want to tell me?" "Yes, Mrs. White. Love your son. Everybody deserves love." "No, I believe there's more you want to say." Her arms laid across her chest. Her foot softly tapped the floor. "Is it about what came out allegedly about you at the parties?" T.D. Jakes inhaled the bitter air that surrounded him. He chose his words carefully. "We all have a cross to bear, Mrs. White." Mrs. White sat up gleefully, waiting for him to spill his tea. "What are you afraid of, Pastor, unless the rumors are true?" Jakes danced on the delicate line of rage, repositioning himself over and over in his chair. His next words were rhythmic and affirming. "Out of the night that covers me." "I know, black as a pit from pole to pole." The famous poem Invictus. "Hiding your sorrows in the compositions of a poem, Pastor?" Jakes held his knees together, which settled his nerves. His icy demeanor suffocated the warmth in the room. "Okay. You want the truth?" "Sure. What happened at the parties?" "I went to several parties hosted by P. Diddy. They were fun. I decided to pull myself from the judgmental world of religion and have a little fun." "Were you there to win souls or find some hope?" "I beg your pardon." Her laugh was methodical and eager to please. "Looks like all the judging you've done has come back to bite you. Only God can judge me." The truest words to ever escape those lips of yours. Mrs. White stood reveling in his discomfort as she pointed to the door. "Behind that door are FBI agents. They want to merely talk to you." An unforgiving smirk pulled at the corner of his lip. "I know who you are, Mrs. White, and I know who you work for." T.D. Jakes stared at the closed door before walking over. He cautiously turned the knob. Staring back was an empty hall. "I needed to be sure you wouldn't break." He chuckled in relief. "One other thing, Pastor. Casey has a USB drive. Do you know what's on it?"